Hi everybody, Mark Sutton from the American Legion, Department of Michigan, Public Relations Director. I am here with Mike Grobbel of the Polar Bear Association, and we want to talk a little bit about what happened 100 years ago with the polar bears and their fight in Russia. Mike, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Tell us about the polar bears.
The polar bears were formerly known as the American North Russian Expeditionary Force. They were sent to Archangel, Russia by President Wilson in the late stages of World War I to guard war material that had been sent to the Tsar's army to keep it from falling into the hands of the Bolsheviks. They were separated from the rest of the 85th Division in Liverpool when they arrived in England, re-outfitted with new guns, new equipment, and then sent to North Russia. They were up there about 9 months. First thing they found out, they were under British command, which they didn't like. Secondly, they found out the war material had already been taken by the Bolsheviks. So as a result, the British commander says, get on these barges, get on these railroad boxcars, and go chase the Bolsheviks. So now they were in the fight, and this became known as the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War.
And what year was this?
This was September of 1918 when they arrived.
Okay.
Over
So
100 years ago.
just before the armistice.
Just before the armistice, and in fact one of the bloodiest battles was held on Armistice Day in the village of Tulgas.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. And you brought, is this one of the uniforms that they had?
This is the uniform of Lieutenant Harry Meade. He was in charge of a platoon in A Company of the 339th, and they had the distinction of making the deepest penetration into Bolshevik-held territory. During the winter, it was basically a stalemate. There wasn't a lot of offensive action. Everybody was hunkered down for the winter, but January 19th, the Bolsheviks, January 19th of 1919, the Bolsheviks went on to attack, and his platoon had to evacuate and withdraw from the village of Ninjagora. And it was a very difficult withdrawal. They had to go down into a ravine. The snow was almost to their shoulders, and they basically they were sitting ducks. The 47 men in the platoon, only 7 made it unscathed. 17 were killed, and another 14, I think, were wounded.
So what was the end result of that expedition with the Bolsheviks?
Basically, the parents, family members, they were all concerned. They're getting letters from their sons. The war's long over. They're stuck in Russia. And they began to circulate petitions in February of 1919 asking for the men to be withdrawn. And ultimately it had the right effect. Congress, or actually the War Department, issued a note on February 20th that they would be withdrawn at the earliest opportunity, which in bureaucrat speaking turned out to be June of 1919.
Okay. So what is the significance between the Polar Bear Association or the polar bears in this expeditionary unit and Michigan? Because we know that in Troy, Michigan, there is a there's a whole monument of the polar bears, and there's several people. What's the connection between Michigan and that?
The connection is the 85th Division, which they were a part of, was primarily a Michigan outfit, and out of the group that went to North Russia, 3/4 of them were from Michigan, primarily the Detroit and southeast Michigan area. So this is truly a Michigan story. It's an obscure military intervention which has been forgotten elsewhere, but because of the geographic proximity of the descendants, we're able to keep the traditional Memorial Day ceremony alive. We have about 200 or so people every Memorial Day at 11 a.m. It's open to the public at Whitechapel Memorial Cemetery in Troy, Michigan. And that keeps alive a tradition that began on May 30th, 1930, when that monument was dedicated.
Now the graves that are around that, those graves are from soldiers that were killed over in Russia. They had been over in Russia for quite some time after they had died. And what year did we bring them back and bring them to Troy?
When the men returned in 1922, they formed the Polar Bear Association. They could have joined, and many of them did join, either the American Legion or the VFW, but they wanted to have their own organization with their own objective, primarily of getting the remaining bodies back from North Russia, because only about half of the 230 men that were killed or died of disease came back in 1919. So it took 10 years, but in 1929, They mounted an expedition and brought back 86 more sets of remains, and it was mostly from that set that were reburied on May 30th, 1930 at the Polar Bear Monument. Currently there's 56 men buried there.
Okay, and you have an article from the Detroit Free Press?
Yes, if I could read it.
Yep.
The first contingent came back and arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey on July 1st, 1919. And the press in Detroit was following their whole journey home from Brest, France, across the Atlantic on the USS von Steuben. So Detroit Free Press correspondent was there on July 1st, meeting the men when they arrived in Camp Merritt. It says, Detroit's own 1,119 soldiers today launched open warfare against Bolshevism in the U.S. Having had plenty of experience with the Russian type of Reds, these veterans of the 339th Infantry have decided to join the American Legion en masse for the sole purpose of delivering a knockout to the Bolsheviks here. Major J. Brooks Nichols says that on the voyage across the Atlantic from Brest, he explained to all the American veterans from Archangel by platoons that one of the platforms of the American Legion was to stamp out Bolshevism in America. They vociferously informed him that they wanted to join that legion. Upon learning the extent to which Bolsheviks' propaganda had spread in their own country, several members of Company I said that they were ready to take up arms against the enemy at home if necessary. My grandfather was in Company I, so he could have been one of those that was quoted. He was later a commander of Post 31, Stevens-Myers Post in St. Louis, Michigan during the 1930s.
And what's interesting is that one of the four pillars of the American Legion is Americanism, and that came about because of the rising Bolsheviks and the communism and socialism and fascism that was spreading across Europe and what they had just fought in World War I. So if someone wants to learn here in Michigan more about the Polar Bear Association or the Polar Bear Expedition, how can they get more information?
We have a Facebook group, Polar Bear Memorial Association, if you're on Facebook. On the internet, we have a website, pbma.grobbel.org, but just use Google for polar bears, and it'll come up in the rankings pretty high. And I contain links at that website to a lot of information, a lot of stories of individual polar bears. And if you want to learn more, there are a number of polar bears on display. Their stories at the Michigan Heroes Museum in Frankenmuth, Michigan, which is where this is on loan from. And also the Bentley Historical Museum in Ann Arbor on the North Campus of the University of Michigan has an extensive collection of diaries, documents, blueprints, etc.
Well, thanks for sharing all that story with us today, Mike. We appreciate it.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And keep spreading the word about our fallen heroes and those that have been forgotten, because one of the American Legion's statements in our preamble is not to forget our comrades.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for watching. We hope you learned a lot about the Polar Bear Expedition in Russia. Have a great day.